Welcome to Complete Intro to Motion Design, where you'll learn everything you need to know to get started in the world of motion graphics. Let's do it.
TipTut.
Part 3, Basic Motion in After Effects. Hello everybody and welcome back to TipTut and welcome back to Complete Intro to Motion Design. This is episode 3 now and we're going to start animating inside After Effects. The last 2 episodes, what we've done is created this little guy inside of Illustrator and then brought him into Photoshop to add some guidelines for the noise effects that we'd like to see when we create these inside of After Effects. One thing I will go over now though is preparing this file for After Effects, because what I didn't realize, or what I got wrong accidentally, was that yes, creating a folder in Photoshop will create a pre-comp inside of After Effects, but so too will creating a clipping mask and a layer. This will create its own folder and its own pre-composition. So what that actually does is drop anything that's inside a folder inside a double composition, which is just a pain in the butt for you guys. So all I did was I selected all of my layers like so, and then I control clicked the twirl down option. And then I just came through and I just selected all the layers I wanted and I dragged them outside of the folders like that. Okay. And any layer that has a clipping mask applied will be turned into a composition inside After Effects with the name of the non-clipped layer. So to show you what that looks like, it just becomes this inside of Photoshop. Same exact file, but with no folders. And that took me about 2 minutes to do, so it's not too bad. Another thing I did was crop this down to 1920 by 1920 pixels. And I just did that by cropping the entire canvas, making sure delete cropped pixels was turned off, and then I just scaled the whole thing down to match it. And that's just so that my computer doesn't have a meltdown trying to render a 4K animation whilst also screen recording and all that other stuff. So we're going to get to the fun bit now. We're going to get to some motion. First thing you're going to want to do is make sure you import your file, your Photoshop file, correctly into After Effects. And the way to do that is just to go to your project panel and either choose File, Import, or use the shortcut Control-I. Control-I opens up the import window here. And I'm going to grab my Sketch 1920 PSD file, and I'm just going to hit Import. That's going to bring up this import window, and there's a few settings you want to get correct here. First of all, you want to make sure it's on composition retain layer sizes, and what that will do is inside of your pre-compositions, it'll make sure that the layer sizes aren't the full size of the comp, they'll be the size of the actual content that they are. You want to make sure it's on editable layer styles, and then you can hit OK. Hello everyone, I'm just pausing this video to quickly tell you that if you haven't checked out my Intro to Motion Graphics series and you're brand new to After Effects, I would really recommend watching that series, at least the first episode of it first, because there are a few basic After Effects controls here that I do sort of gloss over throughout this series just because there's so much to get through. So if you haven't opened After Effects before, go watch that video now, which I'll be linking in the description and on the screen. However, if you're fairly comfortable in After Effects, you should be fine. Okay, I won't stop you again, or maybe I will. Who knows? Back to the video. That will import and create a pre-composition, which is your entire Photoshop file, as well as a folder with all the different layers from your Photoshop file and the pre-made compositions that make up those layers. So we can just leave that in that folder to be nice and neat. And we can open up our sketch file with a double click. So we have our composition now inside our composition window here. And if we look down at our layers palette, we've got all of these layers. And you can see that each folder or each clipping mask that we made inside of Photoshop is respected here inside After Effects. So if we open up our lid top layer, we should see we have 2 layers here, one of which is our grain that we made, and one of which is our lid base itself. Okay. And you can also see that the clipping mask has been applied to this layer. Although it is larger, we can still move it around and all of that information still exists. Okay, and that's important for later on. What that is though is just track matting that below layer, this lid top layer here. Now our first steps we're going to be doing is recreating this dissolve so that we can animate it and make some nice animated grain effects inside After Effects. And then we're going to take a look at some basic animation to get this guy moving. And that'll be more than enough for today. So if you hit tab, it will bring up a quick flowchart composition, and you can just pop back to your original comp here, or of course you can just select it up in your project layer. So if I expand this area just quickly, you can see that we've got all of the layers that we need. Anything that didn't have a pre-comp was just given its own layer by itself. And anything that wasn't named, like the trunk lines here, I can just quickly name like so. I'm going to use the lid of our little lighter guy here as an example of how we're going to set up this animated grain. And then I'm probably going to time lapse through the rest because it is exactly the same process for each layer. So don't worry about missing anything. So I'm just going to select lid top here and I'm going to go inside that composition. As you can see, we have two layers. We have our grain layer and we have our lid top layer. Now we're going to replace this grain with an animated version, and we're going to do that for every layer that we have inside After Effects. So we're going to go to layer new and then solid. We can call this grain because we'll be using it over and over again, and making it the same size as our composition is totally fine. Black is also totally fine because we're going to be adding an effect to it where we control the color. So let's go to our effects and presets panel, and we're going to type in roughen edges, or just roughen to bring that up. And we're going to drag and drop that onto our layer. We're also going to type in fill, and we're going to drag and drop the fill effect onto that layer as well, making sure that it's after our roughen edges. If we hide this layer, we can zoom in, and I'm just using space to pan around there. We can zoom in, and on our fill effect inside our layer, we're going to choose the eyedropper tool and choose this dark color here, like so. When we revisibilize that layer, you can see that it's now the same color as our grain, which is perfect. And you can also see this weird bumping around the edge of the line here. Now this is our roughen edges. What we're going to do is push this to its far extremes in order to turn it into some kind of animated grain. Now, these settings are going to be dependent on your canvas size, but for me, what I found was I increased the border to max, which is 500, and you can see that you get these really, really rough edges, okay? We're going to basically turn this into our grain. I'm going to make sure that I'm going to set a roughen mode to cut, which basically just makes things a little bit harsher. And there's a few other settings here that you need to make sure are correct. Sorry if you can hear that. That's my cat going absolutely ham on a scratching post behind me. Baby, honestly, baby, I'm recording. We want to turn up the edge sharpness again to max, which I think is 10. Yeah, that's correct. And we're going to turn the scale all the way down. This one will depend on your canvas size. For a canvas size of 1920, I found that the minimum of 10 works quite well. And you can see already that's starting to look a little bit like the noise that we want. I am going to turn the complexity up to max, which is 10 as well. And you can see that brings in a little bit more detail here. Now, at the moment, this is still static noise. Okay. We want this to be animated, and we can animate it by just changing the evolution on this dial. If I click and drag, you can see it starts to dance a little bit on the screen. But what we're going to do is animate this using a script. I'm going to hold Alt on my keyboard, and I'm going to click the little stopwatch next to evolution in our effects palette. That will bring up in our layers palette the evolution, and we can apply an expression to it. This expression is going to be very simple. We're simply going to type time and then the asterisk, which in this case is multiply. So time times a number. Now the number I found works quite well for me is 1500. And this is basically 1500 increments a second. And as you can see now, that really starts to make our content animate quite well. If we watch the RAM preview, you can see it's going quite fast in its animation. Okay, if you want that to be a bit slower, then of course you can just reduce the number here to maybe times 750, and that will reduce the speed. You can see that it's, once it's pre-rendered, goes a little bit slower. Now, this depends entirely on your preference. Me, I like 1500, so I'm going to leave it on 1500. Now, that is our grain layer finished. We're going to copy and paste this layer all over our document, and we're going to use each one of those examples as that sort of animated section of grain. But at the moment, it obviously fills the screen. We don't want that. We want it to just fill this same area that layer 29 currently fills. So this is the smallest amount of grain you can get. If you want it to be smaller, you can actually just scale down the layer, and you can see that obviously makes your grain a bit more detailed. I'm going to scale it down to 50% because it also makes it easier to work with. And I'm going to position it just over the rest of my content. Now, all these little guides that are popping up are just because I have this snapping option enabled here. Now I'm going to drag that below our grain layer. And I'm going to take my lid top layer. I'm going to duplicate it, okay, with Control D. And then I'm going to drag that above my grain layer. Okay, now we can see that we've got that base layer beneath it. We're going to hide our original grain layer. And on our After Effects grain layer, we're going to make sure we've got our track matte options open by clicking toggle switches /mode. And we're going to say alpha matte lid top 2. And what that basically does is only show the grain layer where there is content on the lid top 2 layer. So that obviously will fill our lid and nowhere else. So to get the grain just where we want it, we just simply select our pen tool from the menu at the top, and clicking and dragging, we're just going to mask out the section that we want to have grain. Boom. And once you've finished, you'll notice that it will apply all the effects that we did on our roughen edges, but only to the area of this mask. Okay. However, it's got a harsh line, which is not what we want. So we can just go to our grain mask, twirl that down, mask 1, and increase our mask feather. Now for my composition, I found about 100 pixels worked, which basically means that soften the edges of each mask by 100 pixels. Again, yours will depend on your composition size. And there we go. If we RAM preview that, you can see that we've got our first bit of animated grain. Now, the only next step is to go through and do that for the rest of the composition. Now, as you can see, that's going to take a little bit of time, and it is exactly the same process as I just showed you. So I'm not going to do that at normal speed. I'm going to do that at super duper speed, and I'll see you on the other side, and I'll drop back out if I do anything different or anything that I think requires calling attention to it. Apart from that, let's do it. Hi everyone, post-editing Matt here with a quick PSA just to say maybe you'd like to leave this first step to the end of your project instead, unless you're working from a fairly beefy PC. Doing all these rough and edges effects does put quite a strain on your computer, and if you're working from a laptop or something, it might not be able to keep up. There's no reason you can't do it at the end instead of at the beginning. It's completely up to you. So if you're working from a weak PC, consider doing this point at the end. I do show you a trick, however, in a minute to reduce the rendering effort that your PC needs to put in, so don't worry too much about it. Okay, back to the video. Okay, so once I'm happy with a certain section and I know later on that section is not going to need any individual animation, like for example this hinge here, what I'm going to do is take all the layers that are on the top of this lid section, like so the top, hinge, front and base. I'm going to pre-compose those. We're going to go to pre-comp. We're going to go to lid complete and move all attributes to the new composition. That's fine. So what this does is it will move all those lid sections into one bit by itself. And I'm just going to add a quick mask to this that basically encompasses the entire lid. And what this will do is move all of our transform controls to the outlines of that mask, which means when we do things like move our anchor point using the pan behind tool to the section that we're going to want rotating, okay, it means that we can apply and see all those changes in sort of one easy to use composition. And then we can go inside that composition if we want to and still edit all of the different sections, okay? One thing I have noticed though is that all these comps are only 2 seconds long. We're going to need much more than that. And we want this animation to last longer than that as well. So I will quickly go in and I'll make all of these compositions. Let's do 20 seconds in length. And then we'll get back to the animating the grain. Hi everyone, post-editing Matt here. I tried to figure out why the default composition length was 2 seconds in this case, and I couldn't really figure it out. I think it's something to do with the length of the last composition that you made, which for me was these test projects that I was creating. So a possible way around this would be to create a default composition that is like 40 seconds and empty, and then delete that and re-import your Photoshop file, and it should be 40 seconds long. I mean, it only took me like 5 minutes to fix this, but just so you guys don't have to go through that, you could probably try that as a way to get around it. All right, cool. Time lapse should be over now. Let's get back to the video. Okay, so after I've made all of those compositions 20 seconds long, it's just then a case of selecting them all using shift click and dragging their ends out so that they are actually filling the 20 seconds of our composition here. So you can see I've done the animation on our lid layer here and collapsed it down. And I'm just going to work my way through the rest of these layers and do the rest of the animation now inside of here. I will show you this one because it's got 2 types of shading on it. It's got the darker section here and the lighter section, although the actual process is exactly the same. It's just a case of copying and pasting one of your previous grain layers, going to your marshmallow layer, which is here, pasting that in. So we've got a section of grain, and I'm just going to drag that above my first marshmallow layer, duplicate that marshmallow layer, put it on top and hide it. Then when we move our grain into place, it will start filling only that section. We can make that grain the same color as the dark one first. So we'll just grab that dark color. We'll hide our original grain layer for now, and we'll just do our first mask. So we'll come in and we'll grab this bottom section, like so. And that should mask out all of those layers. And we will feather just a little bit. And as you can see, because our mask is really small, it's only touched the very edge of the shading there. So if you wanted to, you could push that further in to increase that. Or another way to increase it is to select your pen tool, edit the actual mask itself, and make the back end bigger. I know that doesn't seem to make much sense, but if you think about it, the more area that this is visible, the more solid mass we're going to have before that grain starts to come in. So that's the first dark grain. Okay, and then to do the brighter one, you literally just select both those layers, duplicate them, and then change the position of the mask here, which I'm just going to delete and redo to give yourself a second mask, and just change that mask's color to pure white. And then there you've got your brighter section, like so. You can then position to your heart's content, and as you drag through, the animated grain will be there, but in 2 parts. Okay, gonna do the rest of the character now, and we'll probably drop back in when we come to the background because I might do it on a slower rate. I'll see you on the other side. One thing I will skip doing are the flame layers, and that's because we're probably going to be recreating these completely later on in the next episode. So I am just going to skip them for now. And to make sure I remember to do them later, I'm just going to hide those layers. Again here, now that I know I'm done with this section, I'm going to select all 4 layers that make up the little spout of the lighter. I'm going to pre-compose those, and I'll call them lighter top because that's what they're called here. Then I'm going to grab my mask tool, and I'm just going to generally and roughly click around this area. This is just so that later on when we come to animate it, all of our transform controls are nice and tight to that particular section of the composition. Okay. That's right, that last time lapse was so powerful, I've changed jumper and put on headphones. Just kidding, it's a different day. It's Christmas. Actually, no, it's Boxing Day today. As you can see from the date in the bottom corner there, the last one was recorded on Christmas Eve. So, I don't know why I'm telling you that. It doesn't actually affect the video. Never mind. So let's carry on then. We have now, as you can see, finished animating all of our grain. Now this looks really cool. I really like this a lot. However, you've probably found, we haven't animated the grain in the eyes, but that's because I decided I didn't want that in the end. You'll probably find that this is putting quite a strain on your computer, as we mentioned earlier in this video. So what we're going to do now is we're going to animate the background elements to our liking. And then in order to reduce the load on the computer, we're actually going to pre-render that into a video and then use that video in the background of our composition. That's just a good way to reduce the load on your particular project. So to help that, what we're going to do is, for now, we're just going to hide all of our layers that aren't part of the background. So let's just get rid of everything apart from our background layers. So we're going to need our trees, our tree trunks. We don't want the trunk lines. What element is these lines on? Is that in here somewhere? Oh, that'd be foreground lines. We can leave those on for now. That's fine. So we've got basically everything here that we're going to need for our background. And we're going to, first of all, pre-compose that. So grab all of these layers with shift click, right click and choose pre-compose. Move all attributes is fine. We'll just call this one background. Hit OK. Okay. So first of all, we can then double click inside that background and we're now only working with our isolated background elements, which is very useful for us because we're going to start animating now. First thing I'm going to do though is grab all of my lines layers, like these ones here, and foreground lines. And why can't I do that with that? Is it because, why can't I do that? I can do it with this Photoshop file. Odd. I'm just going to change the mode to soft light. I think it just looks a little bit nicer. So we're going to grab, what's this? That's our mountain lines. So we'll make sure to name that. And we're going to come through and change all these to soft light. I just think they look a little bit nicer. If soft light doesn't work, we can try screen for darker or lighter elements. This is our moon lines. So we'll need them. Moon lines. Soft light. Let's try. Oh no, let's try multiply actually for this one. Basically, I'm going to go through the blending modes and see which one I prefer for each one. I think for this one, overlay. It loses a lot of its color though. Maybe for this one, we'll leave it on normal, but we'll reduce its opacity down. Basically, I'm just looking to soften out some of the sort of contrast between all these elements because they look a bit bold for our background, which we don't want. Maybe soft light, screen mode, lighten mode, multiply mode, and then like 70%. It's just to soften all of that up, basically. Tree lines, we can try soft light. No, that doesn't work either because the background is dark. That was silly of me. Let's leave that as it is, but reduce the opacity down to about 80%. Okay, that's starting to look pretty good. I'm happy with that. So we're going to take a look at animating these elements now. Now, in the background, I was thinking about having some of these lines move. Now we could do that with all sorts of things. I'm going to try applying a wave warp to these. So I'm going to grab my sky lines here. I'm going to go up to my effects and presets panel. And I'm going to type in wave, drag my wave warp over to here. Now, as you can see, that's going to warp them quite heavily. So we're going to want to grab our wave type, make sure that's on sine. And we're going to increase our wave width until it's almost back to normal. And then as you can see here, we can start to phase these lines and you'll see they'll just start to gently move, which is really quite nice. The wave speed will drop down to about 0.5, so it's not quite so fast. And the wave height will drop down to about 6, again, so it's just a little bit flatter. Let's make that a nice even 300 for the wave width. And we'll change the wave direction to be not exactly 90 because the main one is this sort of like slightly up slanted one here. So we'll just change that line to somewhat follow that section. Then we're just going to do the same thing we did with the phase here as we did with the rough and edges, apart from it's going to be much slower. Might just be time times, let's try 5, see what that looks like. If we were to play and pre-render a second of this footage, you can see that it moves quite slowly, barely noticeable actually, which is quite good. Let's pre-render 2 seconds and see what that looks like. If pre-rendering is going quite slow for you, you don't have to watch this in full view mode. What you can do is turn on a thing called adaptive resolution, which will help you when you're zooming in and moving around. And you could probably drop down to about third view quality and see how quickly that renders for you. As you can see, that's sped up that rendering significantly, especially with all these rough and edges effects that I mentioned before, which is another reason why you might want to apply those last. Let's take a look. Oh, I liked that bit. It jumped fast forward quite quickly there. So just going to hit N to crop that off. That looks pretty good. I'm happy with that sort of level of movement on those. You can see that they start to come away from the edges of the screen here. So we're literally just going to grab our sky lines and shift them up just a tiny bit, just to compensate for that. Okay, that looks pretty good. That's going to then go on forever. So we can drag that element back out again and collapse down our sky lines. I don't want this to happen for all of them though. For the moon, for example, I'm just going to have that slowly drifting over time. So what I'm going to do is grab my moon lines layer. I'm going to grab the pick whip and I'm going to pick whip that to the moon. And what that does is makes it follow it so that every time I rotate the moon, then the lines will rotate with it as well. I'm going to have to grab my pan behind tool and move this element over here to the center of our moon shape if I wanted to rotate the entire composition. Alternatively, because it is a pre-comp, we can come inside here and we can start editing these things individually. That way we don't have to worry about the, the pinning, the pick whipping of the moon lines. Wow, sorry. I've had a lot of food. I'm very slow-minded today. I can't really think or talk. So what we can do then is grab our grain layers, not necessarily the top mask, but maybe grab our grain layers and pick whip them to the bottom moon. And then we can just see what spinning that does. There you go. So that will rotate the whole thing for us. So we'll grab our rotation. And again, we'll just do time times maybe 5. See what that's look like. That's nice. That's like a nice slow rotation. And if we go back using tab to our background layer and we scrub through that, we can see that that revolves nice and slowly without affecting the moon lines. What you could do if you wanted to is do rotation on here, time times -5, which should rotate them in the opposite direction. So you can see now if we turn off adaptive resolution so it doesn't chop in quality, and we scrub, you'll see that the lines are actually rotating in the other direction. So if we were to pre-render that, just saying quarter quality, you can see the lines are rotating one way, whereas the globe is rotating the other, which is really quite cool. All right, sweet. So that's the happy with that moon rotation there. What I'm going to do is have these trees now. We're going to work on the trees. So let's go up to our trees composition, double click inside of that. What we are going to do is actually, let's go back up a level to the background and we'll grab our tree line layer. We'll cut that and we'll pop it inside the actual trees composition. And the reason for that is so that we can start to mask these off and have them animated individually from each other. Okay, so what I'm going to do is grab all these layers and I'm going to pre-comp it and I'm going to call that trees left. And then we're going to mask the left half of this composition. We'll duplicate that with Control D and then we'll change the mask we just made to subtract. And that will bring out the other half of our lines there. Then we can just hit P, keyframe both P positions. Let's move over to about, let's move over to the 20-second mark. And then we can just shift these off screen a little bit, just as if we were zooming in. Then we can scrub through, see if we're happy with the speed of that movement, which I think we are. And if we go back up a layer to the background and scrub through, we can see that over time, those trees look like it's zooming in a little bit. Oops, I rather foolishly left the vines out though, so we'll grab those vine layers too. We will cut that, go to the trees layer, paste it here just to make sure that it's correct. We'll cut that again, and then inside this composition, we'll paste it. We'll make sure they're underneath everything else. And then when we go back up to our background layer, those vines will then move with the trees as they come outwards, which is pretty great. So let's do the same thing to these plants then. We are inside our background here. We're just going to grab the stalks layers all the way through down to all the other leaf layers too. And we can pre-compose that and call this plants. And then inside plants, by double clicking, we can start to work here. So you can see that viewing your overall composition is obviously going to put a lot of strain on your computer, but whilst you're working inside these little pre-comps, these individual elements of rough and edges aren't going to cause too much strain. Let's grab all of our leaves and pick quick them to the stalks. grab all of these weaves and quick them to the stalks. Then we can position keyframe both the stalks and the stalks copy. Let's go to the first frame here, the last frame, and we can just move them over a bit, and then that should move all of the plants, which is pretty good. Nice. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to use a wiggle expression to just help wiggle the rotational value of these leaves to see it as if they're like blowing in the wind a little bit. So we're going to grab our leaf copy, make sure we know what leaf this is we're working on first of all. And we're going to change the anchor point of that by clicking and dragging over to this layer here. If you want to as well, you can just quickly mask, so you can change your anchor points. So that when you select the layer, it just appears by its edges down here. So it's a bit easier to control and manage. Then we're going to bring up our rotational value. We're going to Alt-click the rotational keyframe, and we're going to type in wiggle, open brackets, and then for now, we'll just type 1,10. Then when we click away and scrub through, you can see that that's going to wiggle randomly on the rotational value as it moves away. Let's see what that looks like. So in real time, that's actually not too bad. I quite like that. So that's really easy to duplicate. We'll just copy this code. We'll grab our other two leaf layers. So we'll hit R, Alt-click them, and paste that piece of code in. A quick way to see whether or not your expression has been applied is to check the color of your numbers. If they're red, then they're done by an expression. If they're blue, then they're not. So again, then we know we need to just paste that in there as well. And now all of our leaves, oops, I didn't do those rotational points. All those leaves will be affected randomly by that wiggle expression. So I will quickly just fix these leaves anchor points so they don't wiggle all over the place. We'll turn off snapping for now so that we can more accurately position our required elements. And then we'll just reapply those. Alt-click, paste, Alt-click, paste. And that looks a little bit better. Now they're moving quite a bit for me. And what this is doing is using these figures that we punched in here. So we have every 1 second, wiggle it 10 increments, which in this case would be degrees. So for this, sorry, this is the bottom leaf, isn't it? I'm going to leave that bottom leaf on because where it's vertical, those 10 degrees actually impact it less. Where this one's horizontal, those 10 degrees look like they impact it a lot more. So if we just reduce that down to say 5, like so, they'll wiggle a lot less now. Well, they'll wiggle the same amount, but with less intensity. Okay. So let's do the same thing to these other leaves. We'll just have to come in, make sure we're on the right layer, change that anchor point, and do that for all three. There you go, that's looking pretty good. We can bring up the rotational symmetry for all of them. Alt-click them and paste that in. This one, I'm going to do all of them a little bit smaller. We're going to do wiggle 1,4 because it's a smaller plant. There we go. So they're all wiggling quite nicely. And then should we wiggle the stalks as well? I think we should. So if you want to do that to the stalks as well, you can see that if I were to select this layer and move the pan behind tool like we did before, it's going to create a strange line that follows that. And that's actually because we've got these positional keyframes already on here. So it's going to affect that and move those across the canvas, which obviously is not what we want. A few ways to fix this. I find quite a nice way is to hit Control-Shift-Alt-Y, which creates you a new null object. And then you can use this null object with the move tool and position the top left of that where you want the anchor point to be. You can then select your stalks layer and equip it to that null object. And then that null object will become your new anchor point. Okay, that will be for all of those layers, however, so that was going to rotate the whole thing. So the alternate way to do that is to just delete your keyframes and remove that anchor point. Sometimes you can select all your keyframes and move the pan behind tool, and that will stop it from working as well, but it doesn't seem to be working this time around. So we can delete our null like so. We can take our stalks. We could select both keyframes, make sure our cursor playhead is over one of them, And then if you move the pan behind tool, it shouldn't do that. It is, I don't know why. So since it's literally only 2 keyframes, I'm just going to delete that second one for now. Move the pan behind tool to where I want. Get my position and just remove that position. And then we've got everything working as intended. Bring up that rotational tool, Alt click and choose wiggle 1,4. And that will wiggle those as well. Looking pretty good. Okay, let's do the same thing for this stalk copy. We'll delete our second keyframe, grab our first one, move the pan behind tool, reapply by moving. Alt click on your rotational keyframe with the shortcut R, wiggle 1. Let's do 5. Slightly bigger. All right, that looks pretty good. So if we hit tab and go back up to our background, we should be able to preview all of that animation. So I'll just quickly RAM preview that and we can take a look. Okay, so here we have our RAM preview in quarter resolution. And as you can see, it looks pretty good. Obviously, the grain isn't that large. It's just because we're looking at it in quarter preview. We can see that our plants drift gently in the wind. We've got our sky background wobbling around. We've got our moon rotating. Our moon rotating ever so slowly, and that's all good to go. Now, as you can see, this is going to put quite a strain on your computer. If I were to try and RAM preview this in full mode, it's going to get a bit crazy. It's just like, no, can't do it. It's too much. So one thing I like to do, if we just hit tab to go back up to our main menu here, what we can do is just export our background. Okay, so one way to make sure it doesn't RAM preview it whilst you're working is to hide that. You might want to see what your character looks like whilst you're editing it, what it looks like on your background, yeah? Not just in this black void. So one way to do that is just to hide all of your layers, show the background, and then just quickly export this video. Now, I don't need it to be the fullest quality. So we're not going to export as just a full render, AVI render. We're going to drag and drop our composition into a media encoder. And we're going to just export a quick MP4. So I'm going to go to my project. I'm actually just going to export just the background composition. So up here, I'm going to drag BG over to media encoder and release. And that's going to pop it in the queue for us. We can then make sure we've got the right settings. I'm going to choose, I'm actually going to choose what I think is already on there, which is high efficiency video codec, H.265, MP4 that creates 17 megabytes, that's fine, and leave all these sort of settings as they are. We can just quickly render that into our project document. And what we'll do is we'll just hide our background composition. And when we come to render the finished thing, we can just hide the video instead and show our background composition. That'll ensure we get the highest quality upon export. For now, though, we're just going to quickly re-render this and replace it. So whilst this is rendering, I'd like to reintroduce you guys to Phoebe. Hello, baby. She's come to say hello. That's it. There you go. Cause some trouble. You like to get in the way, don't you, baby? See, it's probably going to take a while, this render, because I'm recording the screen. No, darling. Anyway, back to it. I'll skip past this bit. No, you can't, because you're going to press something bad. All right, off you go. Okay, so whilst that renders out in the background, we're just going to try and see if we can carry on here so that I don't spend all night just waiting. We're going to take a look at animating our little character now. So we've done all of our background. I'm just going to hide that for the sake of brevity. And I'm going to turn on this transparency mode here just so that we can see every aspect of our character, like the trunk shadow, which is what we're going to be animating first. Let's grab our trunk shadow layer. And we basically want to make sure that we're going to be mimicking this kind of flickering light, which is coming from the flame here. We've mimicked all the flickering light with our animated grain, but this is going to be static, which isn't what we want. So I'm going to grab my pan behind tool and I'm just going to drag the anchor point of this to where I think the back edge of the log will be. Okay. Then we're going to see if we can take our scale options by hitting S and just unlink them like so. So that when we start to squash and stretch this, later on we can see we can operate those parameters individually. So I'm going to pop a keyframe on scale. I'm also going to see if I can pop a keyframe on rotation as well by hitting R. And then I'm going to press U to bring both of these up. Now I'm going to go over to about 2 seconds. Let's just hide everything apart from the trunk as well whilst we're doing this, so that we can nice and quickly see some stuff that's going on there. About 2 seconds in, we're going to pop another set of keyframes, which will return this sort of shadow to normal. And then at 1 second, we're just going to squash and stretch these just a little bit, maybe even just, 1 or 2 degrees, just so that it starts to morph in shape a little bit. Okay. Let's also rotate it maybe 1 degrees. And that creates a nice little flicker that we can loop. Okay. We're also, however, going to add a roughen edges. Don't worry, not an extreme one, to this shadow. We'll maybe push the border up to about 50. Oh, that's way too much, actually. 20? Yeah, 20 is good. And then we'll affect the evolution of this as well, so that flickers. Okay. Evolution, we'll just hit time times maybe 10. It should make it go pretty slowly. And let's see what that looks like. Maybe it's going to have to be faster than that. Loads faster. There you go. That's much better. So that's going to flicker as it grows and shrinks. That's pretty good. So let's grab all these keyframes. I'm going to hold Alt and I'm going to squish these down a little bit. Maybe to 1 second. That's pretty good. Yeah. Then we're going to just copy these last 2 sets of keyframes. We can copy them all. Doesn't really matter. And then pressing Control-Shift right, we're going to move along 30 frames or so and paste them. And keep doing that. Now, again, you could loop this if you wanted to. I'm going to press Alt, Shift, and Left there because I went a bit too far. But I think it's just fine to just sort of do this, repeating keyframes for this section, because there's no point for a script. We know that that's what we want. It's looping. We're happy with it. It's good to go. We can then collapse that down, and that's our trunk shadow, nice and animated. Let's show our trunk lines and see if we're happy with all of this. Well, I don't really want it to be in normal mode. Let's see what soft light looks like. That's a little bit better. Oops, sorry, that's the trunk shadow. That looks a little bit better, and we'll reduce the opacity of that to about 80. Yeah, that looks good. All right, awesome. So that's our trunk animated. So we can hide that for now, because we're not going to be looking at it again until we're done. So let's bring in all of our characters and see what bit we want to animate first. Now we're going to tackle the flame last, because I've still got to figure out how to do that bit. So let's take a look at animating these legs. I want them to sort of just bounce happily. To do that, however, we should probably set up the rig for this character first. And what that means is just connecting certain elements to other elements of his body. For example, his arms are going to be attached to his body. Yeah, that's kind of how it works. So we need to make sure that's reflected in our layers palette. So if we grab, let's collapse all of these with U, just so that they're a bit smaller. If we grab the arm behind layer, before we add any keyframes, we can use pan behind tool, and we can just move our anchor point to somewhere where we think the shoulder joint is going to be. Then we can use our pick whip tool to attach that to the body. Okay. Now the legs, I'm going to do something a bit unique with. We're going to use the mirror tool for that. So we're going to grab our pan behind tool. Yes. Grab the center axis point, but we're going to pop them here on this one leg, like so. Okay. We're also then going to mask out and adjust this mask that's already here by deleting some of these anchor points enough to hide this right hand leg. And we're going to use a mirror so that we only have to do the animation keyframes once. Okay, we'll get back to that in a minute. Mouth, blush, eye, brows, they all just need to be attached to the body. The lighter top needs to be attached to the body. The flames should all be attached to the lighter top, even though we're probably going to be redoing them. Arm, front, all. Let's grab the pan behind tool for this one. Grab our anchor point and pop it over on his shoulder. That looks pretty good. And then the lid we've already done from earlier. So that's pretty good. Let's pick whip this guy to the body and pick whip the lid complete to the body, like so. So now moving the body should move everything apart from the legs, which we forgot. Bam. That looks pretty good. Okay, so if we now hide everything but the legs, because we're going to work on that first. So the way I thought of doing it is masking out the one leg as we've done, and then just duplicating the layer in the same way that we did before, and subtracting our mask as well. Then on this one, we can move the anchor point to this other leg. Like so. All right, cool. Let's hide everything else that we don't need. And let's add a bit of bouncing animation to these legs. So let's take our first leg, bring up our rotation keyframes, probably the only one we're going to need. And I'm just going to have him maybe take 2 seconds. And he'll just lift his leg a little bit and settle in that spot. Now, this linear animation is probably going to look quite bad. So I'm going to hit F9 to bring up some easing and then go to my graph editor to edit the path. Now, if you don't see this graph, that's probably because you're seeing the value graph, which looks like that. We want to be editing the speed graph at the moment. I'm going to grab both of these by clicking and dragging, and that's going to bring up 2 little yellow handles. And I'm just going to drag that little yellow handle over this way. That's then going to change. We just hide that. Our animation path to go fast to slow, which is what we want. It's going to go whoop. I want it to hold here for just a second, maybe a full second, actually. Let's switch back to our keyframes. I'm going to copy this one, paste it in place, copy the first one, move over a bunch of frames that are about 2 seconds and paste it in place again. Now, at the moment, that's going to go fast to slow again. Let's see if that's what we want. And take a look. Go up, hold, back down. That's good, but the pause in between them is quite high. So I'm just going to go back to my keyframe view because I prefer it, and I'm just going to reduce that down. Okay, that looks pretty good. I'm going to take a similar concept and apply that to the other leg. So we'll turn on this leg, turn on the body, just check that that doesn't extend too far, that the bottom of the leg starts to peek out. It does a little bit. So what we can do, since we don't have any position keyframes on this, is we can just eke that guy back upwards so that it doesn't quite cover up. Let's bring up rotation on here and keyframe that. This one went 14, so let's try this one as negative 14. See, that's a bit high, which I don't like. So we can reduce that, negative 3. That's not going to be a lot of movement, but that's okay. What we can do instead is shift this leg up a little bit, which will allow us to push that rotation a bit further. Negative 6. Keyframe negative 6. Go back to 0. Drag all of those, hit F9, go to our graph view, select the first 2, and do the same process as before. Select the second 2, do the same process as before. Let's hide our body and see what those legs look like. That looks pretty good. I don't like them working exactly in unison though, so I'm going to grab all of these keyframes. I'm just going to drag this a little bit along. Now they're going to move just slightly out of unison. The first one's going to move, then the second one, like so. That looks pretty good. So we can now just start looking at copy and pasting these. So we want them to pause just a little bit. Now, the reason I'm copy pasting these is because there's going to be then minor 2-3 frame variations between each thing. Okay. Which is what I want for this, because it's going to make it look a little bit more natural, a little bit less looped. And also, we want our animated grain to never loop as well. So if we were to have this looping, it would be because we trimmed it down to, say, like a 2-second duration, which means our animated grain isn't actually going to evolve any further past that particular thing. Whereas if we let it go all the way for the 20 seconds, that evolution is always going to be unique, essentially. So let's take a look at our legs now then. That looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. Let's bring our body back in and look at it from the outside. Dragging out, moving back in, dragging out, moving back in. Okay, that's pretty happy with that. At the moment, though, if we bring back in our trunk, see how he's sitting on that trunk, that all the legs look a little bit too far over. So I'm just going to drag them back to the middle. Quickly check you don't see anything. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And I'm just going to reposition. So as you can see, like you really don't have to worry too much about moving things after your initial sketch. If they change, it doesn't really matter. Okay. Now the body itself, I'd like to move this pan behind down to the bottom. And now that we've animated all of this stuff to be attached to it, if I were to rotate this, let's change down to just third quality so that we can see what we're working with. If I were to rotate our body, everything else will move with it. Okay, which is totally fine. However, the legs we want to act as a separate entity. So now that we've animated the legs to our liking, we can unpin those from the body. And that means when we're rotating the body now, this will stay in place. Okay. So to fix the animation for this then, what I want to do is maybe have him sort of bouncing up and down a little bit and swaying side to side a little bit as he's toasting his little marshmallow. So I'm going to do everything in roughly like 2 second segments so that when the rest of the animation is in there, it's going to all flow together and be set very similar to each other. So I'm going to grab my body, I'm going to grab scale, I'm going to grab rotation, and I'm going to unlink scale again. Let's keyframe both of those, both scale and rotation. Move over to 2 seconds, keyframe them again. So let's take our height value, and don't worry, we're not going to squish him much. He's literally just going to squish down maybe 2%. He's going to rotate to the side, maybe 3%. Maybe that'll be 2% as well. As you can see, because it's attached to everything, it's got quite a lot of impact, even though it's only a 2% sway. After another 2 seconds, well, no, sorry, he'll pause a little bit as he gets there, won't he? Maybe that much. We'll keyframe again. And in this time, in about 4 seconds. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And I can edit these later on, doesn't matter. We'll have them rotate to -2. Actually, no, let's have that take 2 seconds as well, roughly. So we can go back to these keyframes and we can do 2 seconds exactly. That was just Control-Shift-Right, and that moves it 10 frames every time. Let's keyframe that exactly here, and we'll go to -2 here, which will rotate him the other way. Then we want him to pause for a little bit. But then we don't want him to go back to this first keyframe, because that first keyframe is the settled one. Yeah, so he's going to shrink, and he's just going to keep swaying. So what we actually want to do is keyframe these. And then we want to copy these keyframes and paste them, which will sway him back to the other side. Now we can grab all of these, copy, Control-C, because that's starting over on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, sorry. So I can copy all of these. I can move over a little bit of space here and paste them again. Okay, move over a little bit of space, paste them again, move over a little bit of space, paste them again. Then if you wanted to make this a seamless loop, you could probably do that and paste your first keyframes there, but the legs and stuff don't sync up anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Basically, I'm going to be cropping this at about 16 seconds. Okay, let's take a look at what that looks like. Round previewing is probably going to take a while because this is still exporting, so I'll drop it all the way down to quarter quality and I'll cut this out. Okay, so how does that look? He's swaying around, he looks pretty happy. Boop, 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 boop. It's really slow though. Let's speed that up loads. 2 seconds is crazy. What's wrong with me? Not too bad. So let's bring that out to about there. That's better. He looks a bit janky though, because the sort of movement pattern is not very eased because there's no easing. So we'll just hit F9 to ease those out. And I'm going to select all of these. Let me just delete this last keyframe over there, wherever that's come from. What's that doing all the way over there? There we go. Why is that now missing? It's because it's way off screen. So he's going to be rotation -2. -2 is fine. Just keyframe that. So let's grab these keyframes. Go to our graph here, and I'm just going to pop them a little bit inwards. Just pop like that. Just gives it a bit more oomph. So he goes, yep, and he sort of sinks into it a bit more, and then we can look at that. There you go. That's what we like. Now his whole body's kind of got that nice little swaying motion to it. Okay, that looks pretty good. So we are now going to collapse that layer and our leg layers because we're happy with all of them. And we can hide all of this for now. Let's get rid of the arm behind and the trunk layer. So we've animated our trunk. We've animated our legs. We've animated our body. I'm going to take my mouth, blush, and eye layers now, and we'll look at animating these next episode because it's going to be some things like chopping and changing layers and frame-by-frame animation and that sort of thing. We'll do the same with the flame next episode too. But we'll animate the arms and the lid this episode. So let's take our arm behind layer and our body layer. And now, as you can see, that animation is already applied, so we can take a look at this arm. Now, as he sways, I'd quite like his arm to sort of every now and then just resettle itself. So we'll grab our rotation keyframe here, and we'll just have him sort of, as he's swaying this way, we'll have his arm sort of sink into his body a bit and settle. And then he'll go back out this way, and we'll have him sort of whoops, because we drew the rest of that hand. So if we go to full view mode, we can see we've got like a round curve there. So it doesn't really matter too much if it separates from the body. We could just leave it like just touching. So instead of -8, that's gone up to 7. And then as he comes back in this way, we can settle that back to 0. See what that looks like. Just a little bit of sort of bouncing, I suppose you'd call it, like a bouncing animation. Drag those keyframes in a little bit just to see like that. Let's have a look. Okay, so he's kind of sinking down there. Boom, settling. And then as his body rocks back this way, well, no wonder it's going to slowly. We're watching it on full. There we go. Let's watch it on a slightly lower resolution. So every now and then, I don't want that every single time. Just every now and then he's going to go, there you go. That's good. So we'll just copy and paste that a few times in our whole composition. Now, let's take a look at the toasting of the marshmallow. Let's hide our arm behind and go to our arm front. So as like once or twice every 20-second loop of this, I want him to bring the marshmallow closer to his head. I want it to toast a little bit. And then as he pulls it away, I want it to untoast again. Maybe we'll actually just have it. He goes in once, he toasts, pulls away, still toasted. And we won't have this as a loop because that's a whole nother scene. And it doesn't make sense that it would untoast as it comes away. So we're going to use this outer composition to do the movement and the inner composition of the marshmallow to sort of toast and shrivel that up a little bit. Okay. So we'll have him rocking for a few seconds. And then maybe as this arm starts to animate for the first time, seems to make sense, and he starts to rock in this way, we'll have this arm front top. Let's just bring up our animation keyframes for the body. So just as he starts to rock in here, we'll bring arm front, or we'll grab our rotational keyframe. And as he rocks that way, we'll have this one shoot all the way in to start to toast a little bit. Let's grab our position keyframe as well. Press U to bring both of those up. And we'll also have him just shift up a little bit, just as if he's lifting his arm, just a touch, because you don't want that to be like his shoulder isn't attached. But as you can see, like we can lift and shrug our shoulders. And as you raise that, your shoulder would sort of naturally go up. So let's keyframe those. Grab both of these. If we zoom in a little bit, we can just add a nice whipping, like, whoop, nice. Now that we've only done that once, it's going to remain there as he continues to rock, which is the benefit of all these layer linkings and stuff like that. So he's going to toast it up there. And then maybe we'll have him just rotate it a little bit as if he's like, just like toasting above his head. So maybe give him every 30 frames, every half second, we'll just have him waft it a little bit. That looks pretty good. We'll copy those, paste those. He's kind of going like, wafting it around. There you go. And this is where it'll start to toast. Here. Shh. Let's keep him doing that actually for a little while. And we'll have it take quite some time to toast. Then we'll have him bring his arm back down again once it's done. Back to its original setting so we can zero out that. And I think we just did like one or two. Two shift downs there for position of his shoulder. For some reason, his body has stopped rotating, and that's because I just didn't copy these keyframes far enough. So we will do that now. I think I did that as 2 seconds, right? There we go. There we go. So he's still rocking back and forth. Good. So he's brought down that marshmallow. So let's take a point here where he's just started to bring it to the top, and let's go inside arm front all. Now inside arm front all here, we've got our marshmallow layer, our arm stick layer, and our arm front behind layer, as well as our thumb layer, which we won't do any animation with any of those. We will, however, animate our marshmallow. Now we could animate inside of here and change the colors, but that's going to get quite messy with all of these layers that we're working with. So I'm just going to go and animate this section here. What we will do is we'll grab our pan behind tool and we'll just bring that to the center of our marshmallow. And then we'll just roughly, with a bit of space, mask out this layer so that when we select it, the transform controls are a lot closer. All right, cool. So let's hit tab, go back to our Sketch 1920. And you can see that this goes from 5 seconds all the way through to about 10 seconds when he's toasting it. So we've got a marker point of sort of here. So for this marshmallow then, to make it shrivel up, we're going to grab our good old wave warp again and drag that over to our marshmallow. Now, immediately that's made it go a bit crazy. So what we'll do is we'll zero out both the wave width and height. And if we turn this on and off, you can see that doesn't really affect it at the moment. We'll make sure we're at sort of 5.5 seconds, which is the same place that our other keyframes started inside our master composition. And we'll also animate our scale a little bit. So we've got our scale. We're going to animate the wave height and width. And we'll just change the direction to be in line with the way this is going. I'm not sure if that's going to affect it, but we'll do it anyway. If we hit U, that will bring up all of those keyframes. And then about 10 seconds, we want that to be where the marshmallow stops shriveling. So I'm going to unlink scale and I'm going to sort of maybe go to 95% width and maybe 90% height. And that's going to scale that down a little bit. We might also have to edit position ever so slightly. So we'll just keyframe that position here and here. And we'll just do that so that we can make sure that shape is roughly aligned at the bottom there. So that as it sort of scales down and shrivels, we know that that's all good to go. Then, at the same place that this ends, we're going to just increase our wave height and width to about 5. Oh, God. 5 for the height and about, I don't know, 60, maybe 40 for the width. That's going to start to... that doesn't look like what I intended at all. And I think it's because you need the width to always be 40. And that's then just going to start to... Yeah, there we go. As it really starts to shrivel up. We don't want it to sort of move, though. We want that speed down to 0. There you go. So that's just going to start to shrivel. There's the setting I forgot, speed 0. Let's maybe start with a wave width of like 20 then, see what that looks like. Just going to, that is going to make it look like it's wobbling again. So we'll leave that up at 40. And it's going to shrivel, bam, like that. Okay, last step then is to change the color of that. So we're going to go to Hue, Light, Saturation. And we're going to drag that onto our marshmallow as well. And then we're going to keyframe all of the things that we can, which is going to be our channel range. Then if we go to the end and we affect stuff, you'll see that it should have then created a movement through those colors through the hue, because we only just affected the hue as an example. What we're going to use is our hue, light, and saturation just to darken up this marshmallow a little bit. So we'll go back to this one here. We'll set this guy back to 0. I want to change our master lightness, increase the saturation so he burns a little bit, and we'll just eke this guy a bit more towards red, like so. That's a nice subtle change there, which looks pretty nice as it starts to shrivel. Then what we'll do is inside our marshmallow, we can go to our grain layer for this dark grain, and we can keyframe the color of our fill as well. So we'll do that at 5.5 seconds and 10 seconds. And we can just choose a nice darker toasted brown. And we'll do that as well for this white color. We'll keyframe the fill here. Keyframe the fill here as well. And we'll just make that one slightly yellow. That looks pretty good. I think that might be pushing it too far on that one though. So we'll just lighten that up a touch. We go back up a layer to arm front all. We can see that now if we just expand all of these and hit F9 to give it a bit of easing, that's going to over time start to shrivel in both shape and color. Looks pretty good. So let's go back to Sketch 1920. And as you can see now, he'll be toasting, and he'll start to shrivel away and bring that toasted marshmallow back out. I don't like that dirty off-white color, actually. So we're probably going to fix that now. Let's go back inside our marshmallow. Where's he gone? Arm top all. Marshmallow. Let's change that master lightness back up just a little bit. Take that saturation down and just push that guy a little bit further. Oops, I accidentally did that over there. So we'll just drag that keyframe back over this one. That looks a little bit nicer to me. All right, cool. Tab will bring us back up to our Sketch 1920 layer. And we can scrub through just to see what we think. That looks pretty good. Brings it away toasted. All right, that's nice. All we've got left to do now is the flame top mid bot and the face of our character as well. So we'll definitely leave that for next time. But before we go, we'll quickly animate the tilting of this lid as well, because whilst this guy is following the body, if we were to rotate this entire section, you'll see that it'll rotate the hinge as well, which is not what we want. So we want to just make sure that we are aligned with one of our keyframe sections here. So we might as well just do it from the start. And as he tilts right, we want a slight delay, and we want this guy to tilt right as well. So let's go inside of our lid complete, where we've got everything but the hinge. Okay, so I'm going to take the lid front and lid base, and I'm going to apply that to, I'm going to take lid top and lid front, and I'm going to apply that, pick whip that to lid base. Okay, then when we rotate lid base, that'll rotate everything apart from the hinge, which is fine. We'll grab our pan behind tool, and we'll shift that over to the hinge here on this section of the end, this end of the hinge. And then when we rotate, it's going to look like it's rotating a little bit better, which is good. Okay. However, it's going to start to extend past that hinge. We're not going to push it too far, actually. It's literally going to be no more than 5 degrees or so. So what we'll do to mask out these layers now is we'll just apply a little mask here. So you've got lid base, hinge, lid top. I'm going to take the hinge and drag that to the top because that should be on top of everything. And then I'm just going to pre-compose all of these rather than pick whipping them to each other. We'll just call this pre-compose. We'll just call it lid interior. That's good. That's still going to maintain all the stuff that we want. We're going to reapply that pan behind. We can, I think it was 7 degrees just to fix that rotation. Good. Now we can create a mask shape. So if we have no layer selected at all, and we just draw a shape where we want this lid to be visible, we can just make sure that line cuts through the hinge here, like that. Boom. Drag that guy here and just choose Alpha Matte Shape Layer 1. Now, when we rotate this dude, he's not going to appear below that hinge, yeah, which is quite good for us. So starting from the start, rotation, we'll go and make sure if we go back to our Sketch 1920 layer, we can go to our keyframe here, apply a second keyframe here. Now we know that that's lined up correctly. We can then go and rotate this guy until we're happy. About there seems to be good. Then we can go back up to this other layer, skip forward so we know that we're along the same lines again. Create a pause keyframe. Another 1 second over. And then this time, if we'll, instead of going back to what I thought was -7, which is the flat amount, we'll push it just a little bit further. And we'll also grab a position keyframe here and here, and we'll just shimmy that position down so that the lighter still remains connected without overlapping any elements that we don't want to see. Okay. Grab all these keyframes, hit F9, and we'll just tweak these a little bit. So we've now got rotating one way, rotating the other way. Boom, boom. Back up a layer. Navigate to the next section. Give us a little bit of room. So not lining up exactly, but it doesn't really matter. Then it's waiting here, and we want it to rotate back that way. So we've got the starting position, rotates one way, rotates back. We then just need to copy this rotational keyframe, go forward a second, paste that in place. So now we've got our section that we need to copy and paste to our heart's content. Let's take a look at that. So that rotates back and forth quite nicely. Let's watch it in third view so it goes a bit faster. That looks pretty good to me. So if we just keep copy and pasting this for just 1 second, so we've got all of the animation that we need. Boom. We can go back up a layer and see what that looks like in the whole thing. So we'll go down to quarter view and we'll just scrub through. So you can see that's slightly off timing to the main body, which makes sense because as it's moving that body over, the lid's going to like flick that way. Sorry if this has been a bit of a rambling tutorial. It's just hard to sort of think and do at the same time. So I'm kind of trying to explain this in a way that makes sense to me, but it's hard to do that and talk about it and do it. So just sorry about that. I'm trying to get better at that sort of thing. But for this time around, that is going to be everything that we need doing. So let's bring our character's legs back in, as well as our tree trunk and background. and we can roughly see what's going on here. He started to animate quite nicely. So next time, what we're going to do is replace our background. Now that it's finished rendering, we're going to animate the flames, and we're going to animate his face as well with some cool frame by frame animation. So thanks very much for sticking around this long. Apologies, it's been a bit rambling. There's kind of no other way to do it. Hopefully it's still interesting and useful for you guys. But otherwise, I'll see you next episode for some advanced animation and editing inside After Effects before the final episode, which will be neatening things up and exporting this guy and getting him ready for posting online. So thanks very much. I'll see you all next time on the next episode of Complete Intro to Motion Design on TipTut.
Remember to subscribe for more tips, tricks, and tutorials. Thanks for watching.